This material was once so valuable that only royalty could afford it. It adorned the glasses of presidents, the combs of Hollywood stars, and the accessories of fashion icons. But harvesting it pushed an entire species to the brink of extinction. Today, I'm taking you inside a factory where craftsmen have perfected the art of recreating this luxury look without harming a single creature. By the end of this video, I'll show you the secret ingredient that makes modern tortoiseshell patterns look even more authentic than vintage originals. But first, let me show you why this banned material became the most coveted fashion statement of the 20th century. Before we step into the factory, you need to understand what we're recreating here. Genuine tortoiseshell came from the hawksbill sea turtle, and for over 3,000 years, it was considered the gold of the sea. Ancient Romans paid more for tortoiseshell than for silver. In the 1920s, a pair of tortoiseshell eyeglass frames could cost the equivalent of $500 in today's money. What made it so special? The natural amber, brown, and honey-colored patterns were absolutely unique. No two pieces were ever identical. The material was translucent, warm to the touch, and could be molded into intricate shapes. Art Deco designers were obsessed with it. But there was a dark side. By the 1960s, over 2 million hawksbill turtles had been killed for their shells. The species was collapsing. In 1973, international trade in genuine tortoiseshell was banned worldwide. The luxury industry faced a crisis. How do you replace an irreplaceable material? That's where today's story begins. And I promise you, by the time we reach the final polishing station, you'll see why some experts say the modern version has actually improved on nature's design. We're now entering one of the world's leading acetate manufacturing facilities in Italy, the heartland of luxury eyewear production. This factory produces tortoiseshell-patterned cellulose acetate, the same material used by Gucci, Ray-Ban, and Cartier. The first thing you notice? The smell. It's slightly sweet, almost like vinegar mixed with pear. That's the acetate curing. The second thing? The noise. Massive cutting machines, polishing drums, and ventilation systems running 24/7. This isn't a quiet artisan workshop. This is industrial-scale luxury manufacturing. But here's what surprised me most. Despite all this machinery, nearly 40% of the process still requires human hands and human eyes. You simply cannot automate the creation of authentic-looking tortoiseshell patterns. The patterns you'll see created here take years of experience to perfect. And speaking of patterns, wait until you see what happens in stage 4 of this process. That's where the real magic occurs, and where that secret ingredient I mentioned earlier comes into play. Every tortoiseshell pattern begins here, with these massive blocks of clear cellulose acetate. Cellulose acetate is derived from wood pulp and cotton fibers, completely natural, biodegradable, and hypoallergenic. Unlike plastic, it's actually a sustainable material. These blocks weigh about 50 kilograms each and arrive in crystal clear form. But here's the fascinating part. The craftsmen don't just add brown dye and call it a day. Authentic tortoiseshell had between 5 and 8 different color tones flowing through it. Amber, honey, chocolate brown, burnt orange, deep mahogany, and even touches of black. Watch as this technician begins the color selection process. He's pulling out color chips, actual physical samples of every shade they'll need. This particular pattern, called Blonde Havana, requires 7 distinct colors. Getting the ratios right is critical. Too much dark brown, and it looks muddy. Too much amber, and it looks fake. Now here's something you won't see in cheaper factories. They're mixing the base colors by hand in small batches. Each batch is slightly different. Why? Because real tortoiseshell wasn't uniform. This intentional variation is what separates $500 frames from $50 frames. But we're just getting started. These colors need to be transformed into something that looks organic, random, and alive. That happens in the next stage, and trust me, it's mesmerizing to watch. This is where science meets art. The factory floor opens up into what they call the layering room, and it looks like an artist's studio more than a factory. Large metal tables are heated to exactly 80 degrees Celsius. The craftsman, his name is Marco, and he's been doing this for 23 years, begins laying out thin sheets of colored acetate. First, a base layer of honey amber, then irregular strips of chocolate brown. Then, smaller pieces of burnt orange. Notice how he's not measuring anything. No rulers, no templates. He's working entirely by eye and experience. Marco told me he can spot a fake tortoiseshell pattern from across the room. The patterns are too regular, too predictable. Watch this technique. He's now taking a heated metal tool and dragging it through the layers, creating swirls and veins. This mimics the natural growth patterns in real turtle scutes. Every drag creates a unique flow. But here's what's crucial, and this is something that will become important later. He's leaving deliberate gaps and thin spots in the pattern. At this stage, it looks incomplete, even amateurish. But there's a reason. Those gaps will create depth and translucency in the final product, making the pattern appear to float beneath the surface rather than sitting flat. Now, all these layers need to be fused together. That's where things get really interesting, and where that specialized equipment I mentioned earlier comes into play. These massive hydraulic presses are the heart of the operation. Each one generates up to 200 tons of pressure, enough to crush a car. The layered acetate sheets are carefully placed between heated metal plates. The temperature is set to precisely 120 degrees Celsius. Too hot, and the colors bleed together into a murky mess. Too cool, and the layers don't fully bond, causing delamination later. The press slowly closes. You can hear the acetate beginning to soften and compress. This process takes 45 minutes per batch. During this time, something remarkable happens. The layers begin to merge, but not completely. They create a three-dimensional depth that's impossible to achieve with printing or surface treatments. When the press opens, the material has transformed. What were separate layers are now a unified block, with those gorgeous flowing patterns locked inside. But we're not done yet, not even close. This block still looks rough, cloudy, and the patterns are barely visible through the milky surface. It needs to cure for 48 hours in a climate-controlled room. During curing, the material hardens and the colors stabilize. But after curing comes the stage that truly brings the pattern to life. And this is where that secret ingredient finally gets revealed. After curing, the blocks are ready for cutting. These diamond-tipped bandsaws slice through the acetate blocks like butter, creating sheets of various thicknesses depending on the final product. 2 millimeters for eyeglass frames, 4 millimeters for hair combs, 6 millimeters for jewelry. But here's where it gets interesting. As each sheet is cut, the craftsmen inspect the pattern. They're looking for something specific, the way light passes through the material. Remember those deliberate gaps Marco left in the layering? Now you can see why. When light hits the material, it doesn't just bounce off the surface. It penetrates through those thin spots, interacts with the different color layers at different depths, and creates a luminous, glowing effect. This is the secret ingredient I promised you. Translucency engineered at multiple depths. Genuine tortoiseshell was never opaque. It glowed when held up to light. Early plastic imitations failed because they were flat and opaque. But modern high-end acetate, when properly layered like this, actually exceeds the translucency of natural tortoiseshell. The multiple layers create a three-dimensional depth that real tortoiseshell, which is essentially keratin, like your fingernails, could never achieve. Watch as this quality control inspector holds a sheet up to the light box. See how the pattern seems to shift and move depending on the angle? That's the hallmark of authentic tortoiseshell patterning. If the pattern looks the same from every angle, it's a cheap imitation. Now these sheets move to the final stages, where they'll be transformed into finished products. And the next process is so satisfying to watch, I had to film it 3 times. These rotating drums are filled with thousands of wooden pegs in a special polishing compound. The cut acetate pieces are thrown in, and the drums rotate for 6 to 8 hours. The sound is like rain on a tin roof. Constant, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. What's happening inside is remarkable. The wooden pegs tumbling against the acetate gradually smooth every surface, round every edge, and bring out a deep, lustrous shine. But here's the critical part. The polishing is what finally reveals the full depth of the tortoiseshell pattern. As the surface becomes transparent, all those internal layers become visible. The pattern that looked muddy and flat before suddenly has dimension, depth, and movement. After tumbling, each piece goes through hand polishing. Yes, even at this stage, human hands are essential. These craftswomen use progressively finer polishing compounds, finishing with a jeweler's rouge that creates a mirror-like surface. The difference between machine-polished and hand-polished tortoiseshell acetate? About $300 in the retail price. High-end brands insist on hand polishing because it brings out subtle color variations that machines miss. Now comes my favorite part, the final quality control. And this is where you'll really see why this material has become even more desirable than the original. In this quality control station, every single piece is inspected under bright light. They're checking for bubbles, color inconsistencies, cracks, and most importantly, pattern authenticity. The factory keeps a collection of genuine vintage tortoiseshell pieces from the 1930s and 40s, before the ban. These serve as reference standards. Watch as the inspector compares a newly made piece with an 80-year-old genuine tortoiseshell comb. The similarities are stunning. The color depth, the random flow, the way light plays through both materials, nearly identical. But look closer. The modern acetate actually has more color variation and depth because it was engineered with multiple layers. The vintage piece, being natural, has a beautiful but simpler structure. There's also a practical advantage. The acetate is more durable. Genuine tortoiseshell was brittle and could crack with temperature changes. This modern material is flexible, resistant to impact, and doesn't yellow with age. The inspector shows me the rejection rate. About 15% of pieces don't make the cut. Why? The pattern might be too uniform, too dark, or lack that crucial translucency we talked about earlier. These rejected pieces get ground down and recycled into new batches. The approved pieces? They're heading to luxury fashion houses around the world. That pair of tortoiseshell sunglasses you saw in Vogue last month? It started right here, in this process. But there's one final step that most people never see. Now watch this packaging process. Each sheet is individually wrapped in protective film, labeled with its pattern code and thickness specification. This particular batch is labeled HVN07, Havana pattern number 7. The factory produces over 200 different tortoiseshell variations, each with its own unique recipe of colors and layering techniques. These packages are heading to 3 different destinations: eyewear manufacturers in Japan, a luxury accessories workshop in Paris, and a high-end jewelry maker in New York. The same material, but it will be transformed into completely different products. The factory manager shows me the order books. Last month alone, they shipped over 15,000 sheets of tortoiseshell patterned acetate to 47 countries. The global demand for this material has actually increased by 40% in the last 5 years. Why? Because consumers are becoming more conscious about sustainability and ethics in fashion. Luxury brands now advertise cruelty-free tortoiseshell as a premium feature. Something that was once a cheap imitation is now a selling point. The material that saved a species has become more desirable than the original ever was. But here's something that surprised me. The price. A sheet of high-quality tortoiseshell acetate costs the factory about $45 to produce. That same sheet will be cut into eyeglass frames that retail for $600 to $800. The markup isn't just about brand name, it's about the craftsmanship we've witnessed today, the 2 weeks of processing, and the decades of expertise required to make it look this authentic. Before these pieces leave the factory, they receive one last treatment, a UV protective coating. This invisible layer prevents color fading and ensures the pattern will look as vibrant in 20 years as it does today. Something genuine tortoiseshell could never claim. So here's what we've learned. Creating authentic tortoiseshell patterns isn't about copying nature. It's about understanding what made the original beautiful and then engineering those qualities into a superior sustainable material. The secret wasn't just in the colors or the patterns. It was in the translucency, the depth, the way light interacts with multiple layers at different levels. That's what separates a $20 pair of sunglasses from a $500 pair. That's what makes someone stop and say, "Those frames are beautiful." And the beautiful irony? By perfecting this imitation, we've eliminated any reason to harm turtles ever again. The hawksbill turtle population is slowly recovering, and the luxury industry gets a material that's actually better than the original. From raw acetate blocks to luxury fashion accessories, This entire process takes about 2 weeks and requires the hands of over 30 skilled craftspeople. Next time you see tortoiseshell patterned glasses, combs, or jewelry, you'll know exactly what went into creating that timeless look. If you found this fascinating, wait until you see our next video on how mother-of-pearl buttons are made, another material that faced a similar crisis and reinvention. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next factory.